Before the Huns, the deep steppe origins. You begin far from the noise of cities and the stone roads of ancient Rome. Instead, imagine the great open silence of the Central Asian steppe, a vast rolling sea of grass stretching beyond the horizon. In the soft light of early morning, the landscape is cool and hushed, interrupted only by the faint rustle of wind weaving through feathered grasses. Here, long before the word Huns appears in any Roman record, small communities of nomadic families lived in patterns shaped by the land itself. The environment of the steppe is simple at first glance, yet endlessly intricate. There are no forests to conceal people, no mountains to gather around, no river valleys that pull settlements into fixed positions. Instead, the land opens in all directions. The sky is enormous. Life moves gently, following the seasons, the pastures, and the long memories passed from one generation to the next. Archaeologists working across Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and southern Siberia have uncovered the quiet remnants of these early nomadic cultures. They find small traces, burial mounds arranged carefully across open plains, fragments of pottery with subtle patterns and tools shaped from bone and bronze that once served everyday tasks. These discoveries speak not of sudden migrations or conquest, but of long-term steady adaptation to a difficult but generous environment. Here, mobility was not an option, it was a way of life. Long before the Huns are named in written history, the people of the Eurasian steppe had already mastered the art of living with the land's rhythms. Their tents, often made from felted wool stretched across wooden frames, could be raised quickly and disassembled with ease. Their herds, horses, sheep, goats, and occasionally cattle, supplied food, clothing, and material for tools. Each animal species had its own season, its own needs, and its own subtle relationship to the land. By watching their animals' steppe families, learn to read the faintest cues, the dryness of the grass, the direction of the winds, the first hints of an early winter. It was a world without stone cities or written chronicles, knowledge passed quietly from parent to child, shaped less by rulers and more by elders, by shared memory, and by experience of weather and land. In such an environment, stability did not mean staying still. It meant being able to move gently and deliberately toward the next pasture, the next water source, the next stretch of grass that could sustain the herds. Over thousands of years, these early steppe societies developed a deep understanding of horses. Archaeological evidence from sites across Kazakhstan shows patterns of horse domestication reaching back nearly 5,000 years. Bits made from bone and bronze horse burials with ornate harnesses and the preserved shapes of early corrals suggest a relationship between humans and horses that grew steadily stronger over time. A nomadic family could travel great distances with little more than a small herd, a simple cart, and the vast grasslands around them. This relationship would eventually form the foundation of the migrations that brought the Huns toward Europe. But in these early centuries, the movements were gentle, seasonal, and often circular. Families returned to familiar pastures each year, following routes known for generations. Nothing in this early lifestyle suggests haste. Instead, it reveals a slow, deliberate rhythm, one shaped entirely by nature. Climate played a subtle but significant role. The steppe has always been a place of extremes, burning summers, freezing winters, sudden storms rolling across the plains. Yet even these changes occurred within patterns that people could read. When drought struck, herds were moved gradually to areas where rains had been slightly kinder. When winters deepened, families shifted southward, or sought shelter in valleys where wind and snow caused less harm. Archaeology and paleoclimate studies suggest that periods of environmental change sometimes encouraged communities to drift new directions, but these movements were measured across decades, not months. Early steppe societies did not exist in total isolation. To the south, the great civilizations of China developed long fortified border systems intended to channel or regulate interactions with northern nomads. Archaeological discoveries in northern China reveal steppe-style pottery and ornaments reaching into settled Chinese regions, indicating trade negotiation and occasional conflict. To the west, valleys along the Silk Road connected nomadic groups with merchants carrying bronze tools, glass beads, and later iron goods. But even these exchanges did not fundamentally alter the steppe way of life. They were simply woven into the larger tapestry of mobility. As centuries passed, small clusters of clans formed flexible alliances. Some of these grew into larger confederations for a time before dissolving again into smaller groups. Leadership was often based on respect, reputation, and the ability to negotiate between families rather than impose rule from above. Archaeologists sometimes find burial mounds larger than those around them, signs of individuals who held special influence, yet even these are modest compared to the monuments of settled civilizations. The power structures of the steppe were gentle shifting and deeply tied to kinship. It is within this long, quiet history that the early ancestors of the Huns took shape. Their identity was not sudden or sharply defined. Instead, it emerged gradually, the result of countless small encounters, shared practices, and the gradual blending of clans who moved across the steppe, seeking pasture and stability. When Roman writers finally encountered the Huns in the 4th century CE, they described them as if they had appeared from nowhere. But in truth, the Huns were part of a deep ancient world, a world shaped by wind, grass, horses, and time. Before the story turns westward, before the Huns near the borders of Europe, it is important to rest in this early landscape. Here the foundations of Hunnic culture were laid not through warfare or empire, but through patient adaptation to a vast environment. It is a reminder that history often begins quietly in places where the land itself is the greatest teacher. A people on the move, the gradual migration west. You continue along the quiet rim of the Central Asian steppe, watching as the world of early nomadic families slowly begins to shift. Nothing here changes abruptly. Movements unfold gently over generations, shaped less by human intention and more by climate pasture cycles and the living memory of the land. If Part 1 was about the deep roots of steppe life, Part 2 is about the first subtle motions, the slow westward drift that would eventually carry the Hunnic ancestors toward the edges of Europe. Imagine the soft hum of life across the plains, herds grazing in the dawn light, children running along the edges of felt tents, elder herders studying the direction of the winds. All around you the land breathes in long cycles. Grass rises, dries, and rises again. Rivers swell and recede. And within this rhythm, families begin to notice slight changes. Perhaps the winters grow a little sharper. Perhaps the rains fall more heavily in one region and more lightly in another. To nomadic herders, such changes are significant. They do not signal crisis, but gentle adjustments, the sort of quiet signals that encourage a community to explore new lands just beyond its familiar horizon. Archaeological study suggests that between the 2nd century BCE and the 2nd century CE, many pastoral communities across Central Asia began drifting toward the west. No single force drove them. Instead, a mosaic of influences gradually opened the path. Climate reconstructions from tree rings and lake sediments show periods of shifting rainfall patterns. Some regions of the eastern steppe became less predictable, while the western grasslands stretching toward the Caspian Sea and the Ural Mountains offered slightly more dependable seasons. For nomads, the land's invitation was subtle but meaningful. A family might decide to push a few days farther west one year. If the grass there proved healthy, they might return the next year and stay a little longer. After a generation, these small decisions accumulated. Camps that were once seasonal resting points became familiar grazing grounds. New routes formed between watering places, linking distant regions into a network of movement. Along these routes, steppe communities encountered others like themselves. Some spoke related languages, others carried different ancestral traditions. Yet mobility created its own kind of diplomacy. Families met at rivers or at favored seasonal pastures. They exchanged news where the grass was thicker this year, where herds had struggled, which valleys had grown crowded. In these interactions, objects of trade also changed hands. Small bronze ornaments, patterned leatherwork, finely stitched clothing, and the occasional tool forged from imported iron. Archaeologists tracking the movement of such objects reveal a faint trail of connections spreading from east to west. A distinct style of metalworking, once common only in eastern Mongolia, turns up in finds across Kazakhstan. Patterns on pottery echo from one region to the next, not because potters traveled far distances, but because techniques and designs were shared quietly in the simple act of teaching and observing. These gradual exchanges form the earliest material hints of the population, flows that would one day be labeled Hunnic. As people moved, they carried memories with them, stories of ancestors, rituals performed at certain seasons, and a worldview shaped by life in motion. Early nomadic spirituality, reconstructed from burial practices and later historical accounts, centered on a close relationship with nature. The sky played an especially important role. Many steppe cultures viewed it as a protective, watchful presence, a vast order that balanced the cycles of the land. Mountains, rivers, and sacred groves served as places where the spiritual world met the physical one. As communities drifted westward, these beliefs adapted but did not disappear. Burial mounds from the early centuries CE show familiar patterns, bodies placed in extended positions, often accompanied by modest goods, such as small knives, ornaments, or animal bones, symbolizing companionship in the afterlife. The consistency of these practices across large distances suggests that migrating families carried their spiritual traditions with them, weaving continuity even as their physical landscapes changed. The carts used for transport became sturdier, built from hardier woods, sourced along the migration routes. Felt coverings insulated with wool from the herds protected families from harsh weather. These mobile homes allowed groups to travel great distances without losing the comfort of daily routines. When a camp was set up at dusk, the interior of each tent felt familiar, a fire at the center, sleeping areas arranged along the sides, and soft shadows dancing gently across the curved walls. Over time, these camps included new faces. Families merged through marriage alliances or shared experiences during long migrations. In these quiet unions, languages blended gradually. While later historians label the Huns as a single people, their origins were more like a tapestry woven from many threads across the eastern and western steppe. Each group brought something unique, a set of rituals, a style of craftsmanship, or a preferred route through the grasslands, and together they formed new identities that had not existed before. Infrastructure also played a role in shaping these migrations. The Silk Road, though primarily used by merchants, created a series of resting points across Central Asia. Nomadic families noticed these paths not for trade, but for the access they provided to water sources, sheltering valleys, and occasional opportunities for exchange. A traveler might stop at an oasis and meet people from faraway regions, hearing distant stories that gradually drew the imagination westward. The western steppe, once reached, offered new possibilities. Its grasslands were broad with rolling hills and wide rivers that could support larger herds. Archaeological evidence from this region shows an increase in mixed pastoralism, herding combined with small-scale farming. This does not signal a turn toward settled life, but rather a flexible approach adapted to local conditions. A family might plant a few fields of millet or barley near a riverbank to supplement their diet. Yet, when the season shifted, they would still pack their tents and follow the herds to new pastures. Over several centuries, these threads of movement formed a broad, westward-flowing current. No chronicler observed it directly, no single leader directed it. But by the time Roman writers began hearing rumors of new nomads beyond the Black Sea, the process had already been unfolding for generations. When the ancestors of the Huns finally approached the fringes of Europe, they did so not as conquerors storming outward, but as travelers shaped by long familiarity with the steppe's demands. They were the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of families who had moved gently westward, exploring new lands, adapting to new climates, and carrying with them the quiet knowledge of life in motion. As you picture this migration, imagine the soft evening light stretching across the plains. Horses graze calmly as families gather around small fires. The land is peaceful and the movement is unhurried. Each step westward is simply another turn in the long cycle of the steppe, a cycle that will, in time, bring these nomadic peoples into contact with vast empires they have never seen. Meeting the Xiongnu legacy. As the slow westward drift of nomadic families unfolded across the steppe, the memory of another great confederation still lingered in the winds and grass. To understand the eventual emergence of the Huns, you gently turn your attention back toward the east, toward a powerful steppe federation known to ancient Chinese chroniclers as the Xiongnu. Though the Huns would appear centuries later and far to the west, archaeological and cultural echoes suggest a quiet thread of connection, not in the form of direct descent, but through shared traditions, inherited patterns of leadership, and the lingering influence of a vanished political world. Imagine once again the endless plains stretching from Mongolia into northern China. More than 1,000 years before the Huns reached Europe, these lands were home to the Xiongnu, a confederation of many tribes united under a single leader known as the Xiongnu. Chinese records describe the Xiongnu with a mixture of pragmatic observation and distant fascination. They were horse herders, archers, and highly mobile people whose seasonal rhythms made them difficult to pin down through diplomacy or warfare. Yet the physical remains of the Xiongnu tell a quieter story, one of social organization, craftsmanship, and spiritual depth. Across Mongolia and southern Siberia, archaeologists have uncovered large burial complexes filled with carefully arranged grave goods. Some tombs include wooden coffins decorated with bronze plaques, while others contain horses buried alongside their riders, reflecting a belief in companionship that extended beyond life. These discoveries show a society more structured than outsiders once assumed a world of skilled artisans, political alliances, and ritual practices that helped unify diverse groups. By the time the westward moving steppe families described in Part 2 began drifting into new regions, the Xiongnu Confederation had already risen, flourished, fragmented, and faded. Yet its imprint remained. Cultural habits, shaped under Xiongnu-influenced styles of dress techniques, of metalworking patterns of leadership, continued to echo across the steppe long after the Confederation itself was gone. The decline of the Xiongnu in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE produced a subtle ripple through Central Asia. As the political center weakened, many groups, long associated with the Confederation, dispersed, moving into new territories in search of pasture security and new alliances. Some migrated toward the Chinese frontier and became absorbed into settled societies. Others moved northwest into the Altai Mountains and the western steppe. Their movement was not dramatic or forced. It resembled the quiet westward drift described earlier, a steady relocation of families seeking stability after an era of political complexity. These migrations created new cultural landscapes. Practices once common under Xiongnu rule began blending with those of Western populations. Decorative motifs, swirling patterns of animal figures, carefully shaped bronze belt ornaments, and distinct styles of horse harnesses began appearing far from their original homelands. To archaeologists, such patterns look like a trail of fingerprints scattered across Eurasia, marking the slow spread of traditions through time and space. Among the most striking of these artifacts are small bronze plaques shaped into stylized animals, deer with elongated bodies, horses mid-gallop birds in flight. These designs belong to an artistic tradition sometimes called the animal style, common among Xiongnu and other steppe cultures. As families moved west, this artistic language traveled with them, turning up in burial sites from Mongolia to the Black Sea region. Its presence does not identify a single people, but it suggests shared heritage, shared techniques, and a common visual imagination across vast distances. Leadership traditions may have traveled in similar ways. The Xiongnu Xiongnu ruled not through rigid central authority, but through the ability to maintain relationships among many allied clans. Leadership on the steppe required diplomacy, generosity, negotiation, and the subtle balancing of power. These patterns would later appear among the Huns, whose leaders, including Attila, centuries later relied less on bureaucracies and more on personal influence and the careful distribution of wealth. Though the Huns cannot be described simply as descendants of the Xiongnu, the political and cultural environment shaped by Xiongnu influence undoubtedly formed part of the world the Huns inherited. The steppe does not preserve written archives, but it preserves patterns of living. When later nomadic groups formed confederations, built alliances, or developed distinctive artistic styles, they often did so in ways that resembled the earlier Xiongnu structures, not as imitation, but as the natural outcome of a shared ecological and cultural landscape. The connection between the two groups is also visible in language, though the evidence is fragmentary. Linguists have long debated which language families were spoken by the Xiongnu and by the Huns. No single answer has emerged, and perhaps none ever will. But there are hints, faint similarities in recorded names, echoes of steppe terms preserved in Chinese chronicles, and the fluid blending of languages that occurs when nomads travel and encounter new peoples. The uncertainty itself reflects the mobility of the steppe. Languages mix, evolve, and transform across generations, leaving behind a quiet cloud of possibilities rather than firm conclusions. Still, the shared cultural environment created by the Xiongnu's long presence shaped the world in which later migrations unfolded. When new groups traveled west across the plains, they carried with them the remnants of Xiongnu-era social habits. The arrangement of camps, the symbolism of certain ornaments, and the understanding that alliances between families could create powerful, flexible polities capable of spanning great distances. To imagine the transition from Xiongnu to the peoples who would later be called Huns, picture a long twilight over the plains. The sun is setting on the Xiongnu Confederation, their political center dimming their alliances, loosening their presence, scattered. But even as that era fades, the shadows stretch westward, touching new regions. Families, guided by the memory of old leadership structures, continue to move. They settle briefly, then move again, testing new pastures and forming new bonds. This gradual process created new networks of connection, a mosaic of clans, each carrying elements of earlier traditions, but combining them differently as they migrated. Over 200 or 300 years, these communities slowly took on new identities, shaped by ever-changing neighbors. Iranian pastoralists in the west, Sarmatian horsemen north of the Black Sea, and groups whose names are long lost, but whose customs survive in scattered artifacts. When later Roman authors wrote about the Huns, they lacked the long view. They could not see the centuries of movement or the layered cultural landscape that shaped these nomadic families. To them, the Huns appeared abruptly, as if rising suddenly from mystery. But you, following this gentler path, understand that nothing about their emergence was sudden. It was the quiet culmination of centuries of migration adaptation and the enduring influence of the Xiongnu world that had come before. As the winds of the steppe shift once more, you sense the story beginning to move westward again. New lands lie ahead, and soon the Huns will approach the edges of Europe, entering the view of Roman chroniclers for the first time. First whispers in Europe. The Huns reach the frontier. As the generations drift slowly westward, you find yourself watching the steppe widen and then gently tilt toward the lands that border Europe. The air grows cooler, the grasses change their texture, and the silhouettes of distant hills mark the transition from the Central Asian plains to the great Eurasian corridor leading toward the Black Sea. It is here, in this quiet threshold between worlds, that the people who would come to be known as the Huns first brushed against the outer edges of Roman awareness. At first, there are no names, no chronicler writes of them, no Roman soldier speaks of them. Instead, there are only faint impressions, the kind that appear in the archaeological record long before they appear in written accounts. Small objects found in graves near the northern shores of the Black Sea begin to show stylistic features that resemble steppe craftsmanship from far to the east. Simple bow fittings, delicate belt ornaments, and fragments of composite bows appear in regions once dominated by Sarmatian and Gothic peoples. These scattered items suggest that new groups were passing through the region not as invaders, but as travelers, weaving themselves quietly into the social fabric of the frontier. Imagine standing on a gentle rise overlooking the grasslands north of the Danube around the early 4th century CE. The land here feels different from the deep interior of Central Asia. The horizon is closer, the grass shorter, and the rivers run in broad arcs across the plains. These fertile stretches have long been home to farming communities, trading towns, and semi-nomadic tribes who lived in a rhythm shaped by both agriculture and pastoralism. Into this environment, new bands of steppe families quietly enter, bringing their herds, their tents, and the knowledge of living lightly upon the land. They do not arrive as a single, united people. Instead, they appear as small, mobile groups, clans seeking pasture security and opportunities along the dynamic frontier. To the local populations, these newcomers may have been unusual, but not threatening. The steppe had always produced movement. New families arriving with herds was part of the natural ebb and flow of life in these borderlands. It is only later, when larger Roman and Gothic narratives unfold, that these movements become framed as the arrival of the Huns. But in these early decades, life proceeds gently. Camps rise at the edges of rivers. Horses graze beneath the morning light. Fires crackle beside low tents. The day-to-day rhythms remain peaceful and familiar. Archaeology gives you glimpses of this early presence. In burial mounds near the Don and Volga rivers, you find traces of people whose skulls show evidence of artificial cranial modification, a custom practiced by several steppe groups, including those likely connected to early Hunnic communities. This practice was not meant to intimidate, as some later stories suggested, but seems to have held cultural or aesthetic significance within families. It is one of the quiet markers identifying the mingling of Eastern traditions with Western landscapes. Other clues appear in distinctive horse gear, simple, functional, and crafted for riders who spent much of their lives on horseback. Bits shaped from iron saddle fittings with steppe-style ornamentation and carefully worked bone decorations offer subtle reminders of long journeys. Each artifact is a small voice whispering that the steppe was on the move. While archaeology paints a calm picture of growing presence, written history enters the story much later. The first Roman accounts mentioning the Huns appear in the late 4th century CE, almost like distant echoes rather than direct observations. Chroniclers such as Ammianus Marcellinus describe them as sudden arrivals, unsettling in their unfamiliar ways. Yet these descriptions reflect the perspective of settled societies surprised by mobility, not the true origins of the people themselves. In truth, by the time Roman writers heard whispers of the Huns, these nomadic groups had already been living near the frontier for decades. They had exchanged goods with Gothic traders, grazed their herds on the northern plains, and become part of the intricate web of frontier life. Their impact in these early years was not defined by conflict, but by presence, a presence that gradually shifted the balance of the region. The frontier itself was not a rigid line. It was a broad, living landscape where cultures met, blended, and transformed one another. Roman forts along the Danube watched over river crossings. Market towns welcomed traders bringing furs, livestock, and crafted goods. Gothic and Sarmatian communities lived in wooden houses or semi-permanent camps, practicing mixed agriculture and seasonal herding. Into this already diverse environment stepped the ancestors of the Huns, adding their own rhythms to the ever-changing border. Climate and pasture patterns once again played a role. The western steppe experienced periods of variability during the 4th century CE. Some regions became less predictable, encouraging migrations southward or westward. Groups pushed from one area moved into another, creating cascades of population shifts. These were not sudden waves, but slow ripples, each building upon the next. The Huns, as they gradually took shape as a distinct entity, were part of this mosaic of movement. Their early interactions with neighboring peoples appear to have been a mixture of cooperation and negotiation. Some Gothic tribes sought alliances with them, recognizing the advantages of partnering with skilled riders who understood the shifting terrain. Trade likely occurred as well. Steppe goods, leatherwork horses, and crafted ornaments passed into Gothic hands, while agricultural products and tools traveled in the opposite direction. These exchanges helped stabilize relationships long before political tensions arose. It is only as the story moves toward the later 4th century that pressures begin to intensify. Some Goths, pushed by newly arrived steppe groups, sought refuge within the Roman Empire. These migrations caused administrative strain and led to misunderstandings that would eventually erupt into conflict. But these later events should not overshadow the quieter beginnings. Right now, in this early chapter, the presence of the Huns on Europe's frontier is soft and understated. They are travelers feeling out new lands, building new connections, and slowly adjusting to a region that offers both opportunity and complexity. Their camps settle along the river valleys, their horses drink from unfamiliar waters, and their families learn the patterns of this new environment. You can almost imagine the gentle conversations at dusk, elders speaking of distant homelands, parents tending to children, and the quiet awareness that new possibilities lie ahead. The wind carries the faint scent of river reeds and the distant murmur of Gothic villages. The frontier is peaceful, though change is coming. But for now the tone remains calm. The story unfolds slowly like grass bending under a steady breeze. Life in the camp society, families, and daily rhythm. As the Huns settle more firmly along the great frontier north of the Danube, you gently shift your focus inward toward the quiet heart of their daily lives. Far from the depictions offered by hurried ancient chroniclers, life within a Hunnic camp unfolds in a steady rhythmic pattern, a tapestry woven from routine family ties, pastoral labor, and a worldview shaped by open skies and wandering horizons. Imagine the soft gray light just before dawn. The camp is still wrapped in the pale coolness of early morning. The felt tents, known later by many steppe peoples as yurts or jur, rise in gentle domes across the plain. Their rounded shapes resemble small hills or nesting animals curled against the wind. Each tent is made from wooden lattice frames, covered with thick felt, pressed and stitched from the wool of the family's own sheep. The scent of wool, earth, and wood smoke lingers faintly in the air. Inside these tents, life already stirs. A few quiet voices murmur as early risers tend to the embers of the hearth. Every structure contains at its center a small, steady fire, the warm heart of the household, a place for cooking, for gathering, and for sharing stories during long winter nights. As the embers glow brighter, the shadows dance gently across the curved walls, revealing the tools and belongings of daily living: leather bags, wooden bowls, small metal ornaments, and woven blankets folded neatly for the day. Outside, the first sounds come from the animals. Horses nicker softly, stamping the cool earth as they wait for attention. Sheep huddle in scattered groups, their breath rising in the cold air. Hunnic pastoral life depends on these animals, and tending to them is one of the first tasks of each morning. Young men and women step quietly from their tents, wrapped in long wool garments and leather belts, decorated with simple metal fittings. Their movements are unhurried, but practiced, shaped by years of familiarity. The horses are especially important. Among steppe peoples, horses are companions, tools, and symbols of pride. Even the youngest children learn to ride their small hands, gripping the rough manes as elders guide them through the first lessons. In the morning, herders inspect the horses for any signs of strain or injury. They check the hooves, adjust harnesses, and lead the animals to nearby pastures where they will graze under watchful eyes. Nearby women prepare the morning meal. The food is simple, shaped by the land and by the pastoral economy. Milk, butter, cheese, and yogurt form the basis of daily nourishment. Some mornings include millet porridge cooked slowly over the fire, its warmth filling the tent with a comforting aroma. Meat is eaten less frequently, and usually in the cooler months preserved through drying or smoking to sustain families during long journeys. Within the camp, social life is organized around clans and extended families. Leadership flows through respected lines, though not always through strict inheritance. A chief or elder does not rule with force, but with the trust and cooperation of the families beneath him. Authority among the Huns long before the rise of Attila is gentle and negotiated, built on bonds of loyalty, marriage, and the sharing of resources during difficult seasons. Children grow up surrounded by these rhythms. They help with small tasks, gathering firewood, carrying water from nearby streams, or watching over lambs newly born in the spring. They learn by watching, imitating, and listening to the stories their elders tell each night. In this world, teaching is woven into everyday actions rather than formal instruction. A father shows a child how to tie a harness. A grandmother explains how to read the clouds for signs of rain. A mother teaches the delicate technique of felting wool, rolling and pressing it into thick, durable cloth. Craftsmanship fills the quieter hours of the day. Leather workers shape boots strong enough to withstand long rides. Metal workers, often itinerant specialists who travel between camps, forge iron bits, stirrups, arrowheads, and small decorative plaques. Their tools are modest but effective portable anvils, small forges fueled by charcoal and hammering stones worn smooth by years of use. Women embroider garments with simple geometric patterns or animal motifs. These designs are not only decorative, they reflect centuries of steppe symbolism, honoring the animals and natural forces that sustain life. Cloth dyed with earthy tones, browns, ochres, and deep reds dries in the open air. Felt rugs, softened over time, provide comfort inside the tents and are often passed down through generations. As the day warms, the camp's energy rises gently. Herds are guided to distant pastures where the grass grows thick after recent rains. Scouts ride out to survey the land, not seeking conflict, but checking for safe water sources, signs of other travelers, or any changes in the patterns of the frontier. The world of the steppe demands awareness, but not haste. A rider may travel for hours with only the wind and the distant rustle of grass for company. By afternoon, the camp settles into its steady rhythm. Some families repair tents damaged by recent storms, tighten ropes, and patch felt. Others process milk into butter or strain fermented drinks that will be shared later. Children play in the open spaces, riding small ponies or chasing one another across the grass. Laughter echoes softly, carried by the wind, mingling with the gentle sound of grazing animals. Community gatherings are important moments in daily life. In the evenings, families gather around the central fires. Storytelling forms a link to the past, carrying memories of ancestors, legendary journeys, and the quiet wisdom accumulated by generations. A skilled storyteller may recount the migrations of their forebears or describe old alliances with distant tribes. These stories are not told to glorify the past, but to anchor the present, to remind each listener of their place within a long chain of movement and memory. Marriage ties further strengthen the social fabric. Unions between families create new alliances and ensure stability within the camp. Celebrations are modest, but joyful music played on simple instruments, dances performed in gentle circles, and shared meals that mark the joining of two households. Such occasions highlight the resilience of community in a world shaped by constant movement. As night falls, the sky opens in full. The stars spread across the darkness like scattered embers, and the soft glow of distant fires marks the cluster of tents below. Families settle into rest. Horses are gathered closer, forming a protective ring around the camp. A final watch is set not out of fear but as part of the cycle of care that maintains order and harmony. In these quiet night hours, the Hunnic camp feels timeless. The crackle of the fire, the soft murmur of voices within tents, the gentle movement of animals all blend into a soothing rhythm, shaped by centuries of tradition. Life here is simple, but not empty. It is rich with meaning anchored in family and sustained by the land. This gentle world, so often overlooked in hurried histories, forms the true foundation of the Hunnic people. Before alliances, before conflicts, before the great movements that shaped the fate of empires, there was the daily rhythm of pastoral life under the vast sheltering sky. Horses, bows, and mobility, the technology of the steppe. As you continue along the gentle arc of the Hunnic story, you begin to notice how deeply their world is shaped by tools not made of stone or bronze alone, but by movement itself. In the calm expanse of the steppe, technology takes a quiet, elegant form, nothing excessive, nothing ornamental, beyond what daily life requires. And yet the inventions developed by steppe peoples over countless generations allow them to live in harmony with landscapes that stretch for thousands of miles. If Part 5 revealed the intimate world inside a Hunnic camp, Part 6 guides your attention outward to the horses' bows, saddles, and small pieces of gear that made this nomadic life possible. These were the technologies that shaped not only personal mobility, but an entire social system built around the ability to move steadily, comfortably, and efficiently across open ground. The morning begins with the horses, as it always does. They are not simply animals used for labor. They are companions whose lives are intimately bound to the rhythm of the family. Across the steppe, horses graze quietly in the early light, their breath rising in pale clouds. Their endurance, their ability to navigate changing terrain, and their steady temperament made them central to nomadic existence long before the Huns appeared along the Danube. Archaeological discoveries across Eurasia show that by the time the Huns reached Europe, horse breeding on the steppe had already undergone centuries of careful refinement. Pastoralists selected horses for stamina, hardiness, and adaptability. These were not large animals in the modern sense. They were sturdy, compact, and agile, able to survive on sparse grasses and withstand sharp shifts in temperature. Their thick coats protected them from winter winds, and their strong hooves allowed them to traverse long distances without the need for specialized care. A Hunnic rider begins preparing a horse with slow, deliberate movements. The saddle, simple in construction but remarkably effective, consists of a wooden frame covered with leather and padded with wool. It lifts the rider slightly above the horse's back, distributing weight evenly and allowing long hours of travel with minimal strain. Although stirrups, as they are known in later centuries, were not yet widely used among the Huns, Their saddles provided stability through shape and craftsmanship alone. The bridle and reins reflect a similar approach. Bits made from iron or bone rest comfortably in the horse's mouth, and the reins cut from softened leather allow subtle communication between rider and mount. Over generations, riders develop an intuitive sense of the animal beneath them, a partnership that relies on trust as much as technique. With these simple tools, a Hunnic rider can travel great distances at a gentle, steady pace. Mobility becomes not a burst of speed, but a way of being, a calm, continuous flow across the land. This is the first great technology of the steppe, the ability to move freely carrying one's home possessions and community across enormous distances without strain. The second great technology, the composite bow, complements the first. It is often spoken of in later histories with awe, but to understand it properly, you must picture it not as a weapon of war, but as a finely crafted tool shaped by centuries of experimentation. The composite bow is a small curved form built from layers of woodhorn and sinew. Each material contributes a distinct quality flexibility from wood tension from sinew and compression strength from horn. These layers are glued together with natural adhesives prepared from animal products, then shaped and left to cure over many months. The process requires patience, knowledge of natural materials, and a precise understanding of how different elements respond to pressure. When complete, the bow is short enough to use from horseback, but powerful enough to send arrows across great distances. In the hands of a practiced archer, it becomes an extension of the rider, a quiet, efficient tool that requires more skill than force. Archaeological finds show that Hunnic arrows were often tipped with iron, their shapes varying according to purpose. Some were broad and flat for hunting large animals. Others were narrow and precise for penetrating thick hide or armor. Training with the bow begins early. Young riders practice from the ground before learning to shoot from horseback. The technique emphasizes fluidity, the way the body moves with the horse, the way the arm draws the bow without tension, the way the breath aligns with the moment of release. This approach reflects the same calm balance that shapes other aspects of Hunnic life effort, without haste, precision, without strain. Contrary to later portrayals, the composite bow is not a tool of aggression by nature. It is simply a practical instrument of survival suited to a world where hunting, protection of herds, and defense against occasional threats are part of daily reality. Its design speaks to a deep understanding of ecology, mobility, and the limitations of the human body. Beyond horses and bows, the Huns rely on a wide array of small technologies that rarely receive attention in grand historical narratives. Each item, while simple, contributes to the overall mobility of the camp. Felt-making tools allow families to produce thick, insulating textiles used for tents, blankets, and clothing. Felt, created through the compression of wool rather than weaving, is warm, durable, and perfectly suited to the changing seasons of the steppe. Cooking vessels, often crafted from leather, clay, or metal, are light enough to transport easily. Some pots are designed to hang over the central fire of the tent, where soups and porridges simmer slowly through the day. Carts pulled by oxen or horses allow heavier possessions to be carried across long distances. These carts are simple in design, with wooden wheels and frames that can be repaired using local materials found in almost any landscape. Animal tack and harnesses reflect centuries of refinement, each piece shaped to reduce strain on the animal and to allow smooth communication between rider and mount. Bone and antler tools, Needles, awls, and small cutting implements allow for clothing repair and delicate handiwork during long evenings. When viewed individually, these objects may seem unremarkable. But together they form a complete technological system, one that supports a mobile lifestyle capable of spanning entire continents. The Huns, like many steppe peoples, do not separate technology from daily living. Each tool exists in quiet harmony with its purpose. As night falls once more on the steppe, you can picture a Hunnic rider returning to camp. The horse moves easily beneath him, its coat shimmering faintly in the last light. The bow, carefully unstrung, is tucked safely inside the tent. Tools are cleaned and stored with the same gentleness offered to family heirlooms. Nothing is extravagant. Everything is functional, tried, and trusted. This world of mobility, soft, steady, and shaped by practical knowledge, provides the foundation for all that will follow. The story will soon move into the broader currents of Europe, where many peoples, pressures, and landscapes converge. But for now, you rest in this moment appreciating the simple harmony between humans, animals, and the technologies that quietly sustain them. The world of the late Roman frontier. As the Huns grow more familiar with the lands north of the Danube, your attention drifts gently southward toward the long edge of one of the ancient world's greatest realms, the late Roman frontier. Here, at the boundary between cultivated fields and wide steppe grasslands, two very different worlds meet. One is settled agricultural and shaped by stone and laws. The other is mobile pastoral and guided by season and sky. And yet along this border, their rhythms intertwine with surprising softness. Begin by imagining the landscape itself. The Danube winds quietly through broad plains, its waters moving with an unhurried grace that has carried trade stories and travelers for centuries. On the southern side, Roman towns and military outposts line its banks at regular intervals. Their stone walls rise gently above the river, not imposing, but steady markers of order in a changing world. Fields stretch outward in careful rows, their shapes guided by generations of farmers who rely on the fertile floodplain for wheat, barley, and grapes. In the early 5th century, this region feels peaceful at first glance. Vineyards climb the sunny slopes near the river. Orchards shade the courtyards of rural villas. Farmers tend their animals, cattle, pigs, and sheep, with the same patient routine that has anchored rural life for centuries. Along dirt roads, carts groan softly under the weight of produce bound for local markets. But beneath this outward calm lies a quieter undercurrent. The Roman Empire is no longer the unified power it once was. Administrators in the West struggle with financial strain, shifting political alliances and challenges to border security. Towns are still active, still prosperous, but they feel a subtle tension, like fabric stretched too tightly for too long. It is within this environment that the presence of steppe peoples, including the Huns, gradually becomes part of daily awareness. To understand the frontier fully, you must picture the limes, the system of border defenses that Rome built over many centuries. Along the Danube, wooden watchtowers punctuate the river banks. Some are modest structures manned by small garrisons, others are full stone forts home to Roman soldiers stationed far from their homelands. Though these soldiers come from many regions, Gaul, Thrace, North Africa, they live a predictable rhythm shaped by patrol duty, agricultural assistance, and periods of quiet waiting. Inside these frontier forts, life is orderly. Soldiers repair armor, practice drills, tend gardens, and record small administrative details on wax tablets. Officers write reports describing troop movements, grain deliveries, or local disputes. Kitchens simmer with simple stews while nearby smiths hammer out horseshoes, spearheads, and tools. These forts were never intended as sites of grand conflict. They serve instead as stable anchors, marking Rome's presence across a landscape filled with diverse peoples. The civilian world nearby flows in its own gentle pattern. In small towns, artisans craft pottery, leather goods, and metal ornaments. Market squares fill each week as farmers bring their harvests to trade for tools or textiles. Merchants move along the frontier roads carrying wine, olive oil, glassware, and woven cloth. Families raise children amid the hum of local dialects, Latin, mingling with Thracian Gothic and many other languages from across the region. This environment is not isolated from the steppe. For generations, Romans living near the frontier have interacted with nomadic or semi-nomadic peoples. Trade is common. Pastoralists sometimes drive herds southward to exchange wool hides and livestock for grain or tools. Intermarriage, while not frequent, occurs on occasion, creating families who understand both worlds. Stories circulate through the marketplaces, stories of distant lands, of migrations along the steppe, of unusual customs, observed by traders who travel farther than most. When the earliest groups, later identified as Huns, begin appearing in this region, they do so quietly. The frontier has long absorbed new faces. A few families settling near the river raise little alarm. Their clothing is different, their accents unfamiliar, but their presence is not immediately interpreted as a threat. Some arrive seeking safe grazing grounds, others come as traders or guides. A steppe leather worker might repair Roman saddles. A Hunnic herder might exchange wool or dairy products for iron tools. In this early stage, relations are shaped by practicality. Roman officials are accustomed to issuing permits for nomadic groups needing pasture. These arrangements are often temporarily renewed each season after negotiations with local commanders or provincial governors. For the Huns, these interactions offer opportunities to observe Roman methods, the construction of granaries, the organization of garrisons, the structure of trade routes. Archaeological traces along the frontier reflect this mingling of cultures. In some Roman forts, small items of steppe origin appear: bone plaques carved in animal designs, arrowheads shaped in distinctive styles, and remnants of steppe-style horse gear. In frontier cemeteries, graves sometimes include Roman pottery alongside steppe ornaments, indicating families who live between worlds, adopting practices from both. The frontier climate further shapes this cultural blend. Winters along the Danube can be harsh, but not forbidding. Snow drifts along riverbanks, and frost clings to the branches of orchard trees. Nomadic herders accustomed to colder and more unpredictable steppe winters adapt to the environment with relative ease. Their tents provide insulation against damp winds. Their animals graze lightly on winter stalks before being moved to sheltered valleys. As spring arrives, the frontier awakens gently. Blossoms appear along village paths. Riverboats push slowly against the current, carrying timber or wine casks. Roman farms prepare for planting, while steppe herds move toward fresh grasslands. The rhythms of the agricultural world and the pastoral world move in parallel, occasionally intersecting in trade conversation or shared labor. Yet, even in this peaceful coexistence, Rome remains watchful. Its officials understand that mobility creates uncertainty. Reports circulate of shifting alliances among Goths, Sarmatians, and other tribes living north of the river. Some groups grow unsettled by pressures from farther east, pressures that may be related to the Huns' own gradual expansion. Roman commanders observe these movements with cautious interest, aware that change at the frontier often begins quietly. Still, this period before the Huns take on a more defined political role is characterized more by curiosity than by conflict. Roman diplomats exchange words with steppe leaders. Traders learn a few phrases in unfamiliar languages. Children in frontier towns sometimes see riders from the plains and watch them with a mixture of wonder and admiration. The boundaries between cultures become soft, and the frontier becomes a place where worlds meet, not yet collide. From this gentle mingling, new patterns will soon form. The Great Migration era lies just ahead, a time when the movements of many peoples will reshape the map of Europe. But in these early years, the frontier remains a quiet place, suspended between stability and change. A web of peoples, Goths, Alans, and the Great Migration era. As the seasons turn gently along the Danube frontier, the world around the Huns begins to reveal a wider tapestry, a living web of peoples whose histories, languages, and migrations slowly intertwine. The steppe is never still. Even when the grass seems motionless under the warm sweep of summer wind, communities are shifting in quiet patterns across the horizon. Clans relocate to new pastures. Tribes negotiate alliances. Traders carry stories from one encampment to the next. And through these many movements, the Huns gradually find themselves woven into the larger landscape of the Great Migration era. To understand this world, imagine the vast northern plains stretching from the Black Sea to the forests of Eastern Europe. This landscape is dotted with camps and villages belonging to many different peoples, each with its own rhythms, yet all shaped by the same seasonal pulse. The Goths long settled along the northern shores of the Black Sea, live in wooden houses, and farm the fertile soil. They raise livestock, cultivate grain, and trade with Roman towns to the south. Their society blends martial traditions with a growing familiarity with Roman customs, creating a culture balanced between the steppe and the empire. The Alans, by contrast, remain closer in spirit and lifestyle to the nomadic world. They herd horses and sheep across the plains, their tents rising and falling with the seasons. Their mobility allows them to travel great distances, and their skills as riders make them respected allies or formidable opponents in regional politics. Hellenic craftsmanship, especially in horse gear and metalwork, is widely admired across the steppe. Farther north and west, smaller communities, Sarmatians, Typhals, Gepids, and countless groups whose names have faded from the historical record inhabit landscapes shaped by forests, rivers, and grasslands. Their interactions form a complex network of trade, marriage, and negotiation. In this world, identities are fluid, alliances shift gradually, and boundaries are drawn more by custom than by walls. It is within this environment that the Huns begin to interact more frequently with their neighbors. These interactions are not sudden confrontations, but gradual encounters, meetings at river crossings, exchanges at seasonal markets, and shared grazing grounds used in times of plenty. Archaeological finds suggest that Hunnic-style artifacts appear among Gothic possessions decades before written histories note any conflict. These objects, small bronze plaques, distinctive arrowheads, and pieces of horse gear, likely arrived through trade gift exchange or the movement of families seeking new opportunities. For the Goths, life along the frontier is increasingly influenced by both Rome and the steppe. Roman goods, glassware, pottery, finely woven cloth flow into Gothic settlements through trade or diplomatic contact. At the same time, steppe tools and techniques shape their horsemanship and certain styles of ornamentation. The Gothic world becomes a meeting point of cultures where traditions blend gently over generations. The Alans, with their deep pastoral roots, interact with the Huns even more closely. Their lifestyles share many similarities: mobility, reliance on horses, and a social structure built around extended families and respected leaders. In some regions, the Alans and Huns compete for the same rich pastures. In others, they form alliances, sharing roots and resources. When steppe riders meet, the interactions often involve quiet conversations, cautious observation, and the exchange of news carried across long distances. This interconnected world begins to feel the subtle stirrings of larger change. Climate fluctuations across the steppe create mild uncertainties in grazing conditions. Some regions grow drier, others experience colder winters. Herds begin to shift accordingly, pulling families along with them. What appears as a small movement in one region gently pushes another population westward or southward. These natural adjustments create a chain reaction, encouraging migrations that slowly reshape the population map. The Huns, still forming their identity as a confederation, begin to gather strength through new alliances. Their leaders demonstrate a talent for diplomacy, for weaving together clans from different regions, for mediating disputes, and for offering protection in exchange for loyalty. This political flexibility reflects older steppe traditions, yet it adapts to the new environment of Eastern Europe, where settled agricultural peoples live alongside pastoralists. As Hunnic influence expands, some Gothic groups seek closer ties with the Roman Empire for security. Treaties are negotiated, allowing certain tribes to settle within imperial borders in exchange for military service or tribute. These arrangements are delicate. They require trust between Roman officials and Gothic leaders, trust that is not always sustained in times of scarcity or misunderstanding. Even small disputes, grain shortages, unclear promises, or variations in leadership can strain the balance. Meanwhile, other Gothic communities remain independent, observing the shifting patterns around them with care. Some Goths welcome the opportunity to trade and negotiate with the Huns, seeing them as useful allies in local rivalries. Others grow uneasy, sensing the growing strength of the newcomers who traverse the plains with such natural ease. The Alans, with their nomadic heritage, navigate this changing world with practiced adaptability. Some groups migrate westward, joining coalitions of Goths or interacting with Roman garrisons. Others maintain their distance, moving through open grasslands where their horses can roam freely. In several regions, Alan and Hunnic families intermarry, binding their futures together. This slow, steady integration of peoples is the heart of the Great Migration era. It is not defined solely by conflict or dramatic upheaval, but by gradual blending, the way ideas, fashions, technologies, and family lines cross and recross borders until new cultural landscapes emerge. Roman observers writing from distant cities often misunderstand this complexity. To them, it sometimes appears as if new peoples appear suddenly pushed by others from the east. But up close, the movements are much more gradual and interconnected. The frontier is a living system responding to environmental, economic, and social changes that unfold over many decades. For the Huns, this era becomes a period of quiet consolidation. Their leaders observe the patterns among Goths, Alans, and Romans, learning how to navigate the complex political terrain. They discover which tribes hold influence, which leaders command respect, and which regions offer secure grazing grounds. By forming alliances, adopting new families into their confederation, and establishing themselves as a stabilizing or protective force among certain groups, the Huns slowly build the foundation for the powerful polity they will later become. As the sun sets on another evening along the frontier, you can picture the soft glow of fires stretching across the plains. Gothic villages nestled beside their fields, Allan camps pitched near grazing horses, Hunnic families settling beside riverbanks under the wide night sky. Each group follows its own rhythms, yet all are part of the same gentle, ongoing movement of peoples across Europe, a movement that will eventually reshape entire empires. The rise of Attila order from a nomadic confederation. The story now enters a quieter but deeply formative chapter 1, in which the Hunnic world begins to gather its many threads into a more unified shape. No sudden conquests define this moment. Instead, the transformation unfolds slowly, much like the widening of a river, as tributaries join its flow. Over several decades in the early 5th century, a loose network of clans becomes something more coordinated, more stable, and more capable of directing its own future. It is within this environment that a young figure named Attila grows up, shaped not by war or spectacle, but by the calm, deliberate rhythms of steppe life and the steady consolidation of the Hunnic Confederation. To understand Attila's rise, you must first picture the political landscape he inherits. The Huns of this period are not a single tribe, but an alliance of many families, clans and subgroups, some with Eastern origins, others woven in through marriage or voluntary association. Their leaders, often referred to as chieftains or nobles, guide their communities through negotiation, gift-giving, and a constant balancing of interests. These men are respected for their judgment, generosity, and ability to maintain harmony among diverse peoples. Among the Huns, leadership flows through kinship lines, but does not rely strictly on primogeniture. Influence is earned through wisdom skill and one's capacity to mediate between families. This creates a political structure that is flexible yet deeply relational, a system in which authority emerges naturally from the confidence of the community rather than from rigid hierarchy. When Attila is a child, this structure is embodied in the joint rule of his uncles Rua and Oktar, respected leaders who maintain stability among the Hunnic groups settled near the Middle Danube. Their leadership style reflects the traditions of the steppe. They build alliances through diplomacy. They distribute wealth from trade and negotiations, and they listen carefully to the needs of the clans beneath them. Under their guidance, the Huns slowly increase their influence across the frontier regions, not through rapid expansion, but through careful, patient cultivation of relationships with neighboring Gothic, Allan, and Roman communities. Young Attila grows up in this environment of calm but steady political maturation. He witnesses elders resolving disputes in long discussions over shared meals. He sees visiting envoys welcomed into tents where hospitality and patience are valued above haste. He watches as alliances are renewed through gifts of horses, crafted ornaments, or finely woven cloth. From this world he learns that power on the steppe is rarely loud or abrupt. It is quiet, steady, and grounded in the trust one builds over time. Life for a boy in a Hunnic camp is filled with the gentle routines described in earlier parts of this story. Attila learns to ride from a very young age, developing a natural sense of balance and harmony with his horse. He practices archery under the guidance of skilled elders, learning to draw the composite bow with fluidity rather than force. He helps tend herds, participates in seasonal migrations, and listens to stories told around evening fires, stories of ancestors, long journeys, and the vastness of the steppe sky. As he grows older, Attila begins to take part in the diplomatic life of the Confederation. Historical accounts suggest he may have spent time in Roman territories as part of a diplomatic exchange, a common practice used to create goodwill and ensure the fulfillment of treaty obligations. If so, he would have observed Roman cities with their stone walls, bustling markets, and structured systems of governance, a contrast to the mobile world of his own people. Yet even within these differences, he may have sensed the underlying similarities. Both societies valued order alliances and careful negotiation. By the time Attila reaches adulthood, the Hunnic Confederation is ready for more coordinated leadership. With the passing of earlier rulers, Attila and his brother Bleda inherit a shared responsibility for guiding the clans. Their rule begins not with dramatic battles, but with efforts to maintain unity among the diverse groups that make up the Hunnic world. They travel between camps, meet with clan leaders, and strengthen ties through the traditional exchange of gifts. During these early years, the Huns continue to interact with the Roman Empire as both negotiators and mercenaries. Roman officials in the Eastern Empire often seek Hunnic assistance in resolving conflicts along their borders. In return, they provide annual payments not as tribute in the classical sense, but as part of diplomatic agreements designed to maintain stability. For the Huns, these payments represent resources that can be redistributed among their people, reinforcing loyalty and strengthening the confederation. This period of shared rule between Attila and Bleda is calm but pivotal. Their leadership brings greater coherence to the confederation. They establish clearer channels of communication among clans, coordinate seasonal gatherings and mediate disputes with careful attention. Archaeological finds from this era, including ornate metalwork, richly decorated horse gear, and finely crafted ornaments, suggest a growing prosperity and artistic flourishing within Hunnic society. After Bleda's death, Attila becomes the primary leader of the Huns. Yet even now his power does not depend on domination. Instead, it emerges from the confidence of a society that sees in him a stabilizing presence, someone who understands the needs of the clans, who can negotiate with Rome effectively, and who upholds the values of steppe leadership. His reputation is built gradually through years of steady governance rather than moments of spectacle. Attila's growing influence is reflected in the way other peoples interact with the Huns. Gothic and Alan groups, recognizing the stability he brings, align themselves more closely with the Confederation. Roman diplomats approach Attila with respect, often seeking mutually beneficial agreements. These peaceful exchanges form the foundation for the more complex relations that will unfold later in the story. What distinguishes Attila in these years is not aggression, but clarity of purpose. He recognizes the value of unity among the Huns and understands the delicate balance of the frontier world. His leadership style, shaped by tradition, observation, and years of quiet practice, emphasizes order, continuity, and the importance of maintaining relationships across vast cultural landscapes. As the sun sets on this chapter, imagine Attila standing near the edge of a Hunnic camp at dusk. The horses settle into quiet clusters, the fires burn low and warm, families speak softly inside their tents. The air is calm. In this moment, Attila is not yet the formidable figure of later histories. He is a leader emerging from the long traditions of the steppe, steady, observant, and deeply attuned to the rhythms of his people. Empire in motion, the Hunnic sphere at its height. As the Hunnic Confederation moves steadily into the middle of the 5th century, you begin to sense a new stillness beneath the long grass of the plains, a calm confidence born of unity, organization, and shared purpose. Under Attila's leadership, the Hunnic world does not transform into an empire. In the Roman sense, it builds no stone capitals, raises no monumental walls, leaves no carved inscriptions to proclaim its power. Instead, its strength lies in motion, continuity, and the collective energy of countless families traveling together under a shared horizon. The Hunnic sphere at its height is a living landscape stretching across the wide region between the Carpathian Basin and the eastern steppes and extending its influence across many neighboring peoples. It is a realm defined not by borders but by relationships, a network of alliances, agreements, and mutual responsibilities that tie together a mosaic of clans from diverse backgrounds. To understand this world, you must picture it not as a map with sharp lines, but as a series of overlapping circles that expand and soften depending on the season the herd needs and the diplomatic currents of the time. Begin with the Carpathian Basin, a broad, gentle expanse of plains and river valleys surrounded by rolling hills and mountains. This region becomes a center of gravity for the Hunnic Confederation. Its wide, fertile lands offer excellent grazing for horses and other livestock, while its rivers provide water routes that connect distant communities. The Danube, flowing slowly along the southern edge, serves as both a natural boundary and a corridor for trade diplomacy and travel. Hunnic camps in this region are large but fluid. Families pitch their felt tents in broad circles or gentle rows, leaving open spaces for animals, gatherings, and fires that illuminate the cool night air. These camps are not permanent settlements. They shift with the seasons, the availability of pasture, and the movements of allied families. Yet, over time, certain areas become favored for winter or summer encampments, creating familiar patterns that provide stability without anchoring the people to a single place. Within these camps, life continues, much as described in earlier parts. Herds are tended, crafts are practiced, and daily rhythms unfold with calm consistency. But now, the gatherings grow larger. Representatives from Gothic Alan Sarmatian and other groups arrive to renew agreements, pledge loyalty, or discuss matters of shared concern. These meetings take place around central fires where clan leaders sit alongside Hunnic nobles exchanging gifts and speaking in measured tones about pasture rights, trade routes, and the peaceful management of borderlands. Attila presides over many of these gatherings. He does not sit upon a throne of stone or metal. Instead, he may occupy a prominent seat within the largest tent, surrounded by respected elders and advisors. His authority is quiet but unmistakable. He listens carefully, speaks sparingly, and resolves disputes with a depth of understanding shaped by years of diplomatic experience. His leadership reinforces the cohesion of the entire Confederation, giving confidence to allied groups and reassurance to neighboring peoples. Transactions with the Roman Empire form another part of this steady governance. Diplomacy between the Huns and the Eastern Roman Empire becomes frequent and complex. Envoys travel between Hunnic camps and Roman cities carrying letters, gifts, and annual payments agreed upon in formal treaties. These payments, often described in Roman sources as tribute function, more accurately as negotiated compensations aimed at maintaining peaceful relations and supporting Hunnic administrative needs. Roman officials, aware of the stability the Huns bring to the frontier, engage in these negotiations with seriousness. Their envoys report the remarkable organization they observe among the Huns, often expressing surprise at the orderliness of their camps, the discipline of their riders, and the calm decision-making of their leaders. Despite cultural differences, mutual respect often emerges through repeated contact. The frontier, once seen as a dividing line, becomes a zone of communication where the settled world of Rome interacts with the mobile world of the steppe. Trade also flourishes in this period. Hunnic merchants and Roman traders exchange goods through designated border points and seasonal markets. Horses' furs, leather goods, and steppe textiles cross into Roman territories, while glassware, finely worked metal vessels, and embroidered fabrics flow in the opposite direction. These exchanges enrich both worlds and deepen the peaceful interactions that sustain the Confederation's prosperity. Archaeological evidence from the Carpathian Basin reflects this interconnectedness. Excavations reveal richly decorated metalwork belt buckles, harness fittings, and small plaques, blending steppe artistic traditions with influences from Roman workshops. The designs often feature animals in fluid motion, a reflection of the steppe aesthetic that values dynamism and harmony. At the same time, imported goods from Rome appear in Hunnic graves, indicating that these items were cherished as symbols of friendship, diplomacy, or personal prestige. The Hunnic sphere is not entirely free of conflict, but such tensions are generally local and carefully managed. Clans sometimes dispute grazing rights or misunderstandings arise along border regions. In these instances, Attila and his advisors work to mediate solutions that preserve harmony. Their ability to balance competing interests strengthens the Confederation and reduces the likelihood of the sudden upheavals that characterize other periods of history. One of the reasons for this stability is the Confederation's flexible governance. Rather than imposing uniform rules, the Huns allow allied groups to maintain their own traditions, languages, and methods of leadership. This cultural autonomy fosters loyalty. A Gothic or Allan leader living under Hunnic protection does not feel his identity threatened. Instead, he gains security access to shared resources and a place within a broader coalition that benefits his people. The mobility of the Confederation also contributes to its coherence. Seasonal gatherings bring together families from vast distances, creating shared experiences and reinforcing social bonds. Children grow up meeting peers from other clans, learning stories and customs that transcend their immediate families. Over time, the circulation of people and ideas weaves a fabric of identity that is distinctively Hunnic, diverse, adaptive, and rooted in the long traditions of the steppe. At night, the Hunnic world at its height is peaceful and expansive. Fires flicker across the encampments, their glow reflecting off the polished surfaces of metal ornaments and the soft fur linings of tent interiors. Horses shift quietly in their enclosures, their dark shapes blending with the twilight. The sounds of gentle conversation float through the evening air, mingling with the distant murmurs of the river. As you stand within this calm landscape, it becomes clear that the Hunnic sphere is not defined by conquest or force alone, but by a delicate balance of organization, diplomacy, and shared values. It is an empire of movement, one that grows not by walls or cities, but by relationships that span the open plains. Soon, this world will face new challenges as interactions with the Roman Empire grow more complex. But for now, The Huns live in a moment of harmony, their society vibrant and deeply connected. Rome under pressure, diplomacy, payments, and anxiety. As the Hunnic Confederation settles into its season of harmony and stability, you gently turn your eyes southward across the broad flow of the Danube toward the lands of the Roman Empire. Here in the great cities and fertile provinces of the Eastern Roman world, life continues in its familiar rhythms, yet beneath the surface you begin to sense a quiet tension. It is not the sharp tension of imminent conflict, but a soft, persistent pressure, like the slow tightening of a cord drawn through uncertain hands. For centuries, Rome has been accustomed to managing its borders through diplomacy, trade, and carefully structured agreements with neighboring peoples. But by the mid-5th century, these systems are strained. The empire is still wealthy, still administratively sophisticated, but it is also more fragile than in earlier eras. Its frontier defenses require constant staffing. Its treasury must juggle expenses that once seemed easy to bear, and its internal politics shifting among court officials, generals, and regional administrators add layers of complexity that make every decision feel delicate. It is within this landscape that relations with the Huns begin to carry a new weight. Imagine standing on the southern bank of the Danube in early spring. The river is full with melted snow from the distant mountains, its waters moving slowly under a pale sky. Along the frontier, Roman forts rise above the reeds and low marsh plants. Inside these walls, soldiers maintain their routines, sharpening tools, repairing wooden structures, or tending to supply stores that arrive by boat each season. From time to time, envoys from the Hunnic Confederation approach the river. They come not with hostility, but with calm purpose. Their arrival is expected for regular diplomatic exchanges have become embedded in the relationship between the two powers. Roman commanders receive them with protocol shaped by centuries of imperial tradition. They offer bread, wine, and shaded spaces for discussion. The Hunnic representatives bring messages from Attila or other leaders, messages usually concerning agreements, payments, and the peaceful management of border issues. These diplomatic meetings unfold slowly. Voices are soft gestures, measured. Translators move carefully between languages, ensuring that every word is clear. Both sides understand the importance of precision, because misunderstandings here can ripple across vast territories. A central topic in these meetings is the annual payments owed by the Roman Empire to the Huns under existing treaties. These payments, though sometimes described as tribute in ancient texts, are more accurately viewed as negotiated compensations, formal acknowledgments that peaceful relations benefit both parties. They help maintain regional stability, support the Hunnic Confederation in its administrative needs, and reduce the risk of border conflicts. For the Romans, these payments are manageable in prosperous times. Gold flows steadily from imperial mines and from taxes collected across the provinces. But in leaner years, or during periods of drought, famine, or internal strain, the payments become more challenging. Senators debate their necessity. Court factions argue over priorities. Some administrators advocate delaying or reducing the sums, hoping the Huns will accept temporary adjustments without protest. Yet the Hunnic envoys, calm and precise, remind their Roman counterparts that treaties are built upon trust. Payments delayed too long or reduced without consultation can be interpreted as disregard not only toward their leaders, but toward the entire network of agreements that sustains frontier harmony. This delicate balancing act creates a quiet anxiety within the empire. Not fear merely a gentle but persistent awareness that stability requires careful attention. Meanwhile, everyday life in Roman towns along the frontier continues with its familiar patterns. Farmers plant spring crops. Traders carry goods to and from market squares. Artisans craft pottery, grind grain, or tan hides beneath the shade of wooden awnings. Children play along the edges of vineyards, their laughter drifting through the warm afternoon air. Yet even here small signs of change appear. News arrives from the interior provinces of political disputes, minor at first glance, but enough to cause administrators to reconsider budget allocations. Grain shortages in distant regions require emergency shipments. Coastal defenses along the eastern Mediterranean demand repairs. Each new challenge, though manageable, individually contributes to the slow accumulation of pressure. Frontier communities hear rumors of these developments. Nothing dramatic, just quiet conversations in taverns, whispers at market stalls, and thoughtful glances exchanged between soldiers who know that imperial priorities can shift with little warning. The presence of the Huns, always steady and watchful, adds another layer to this atmosphere. Travelers speak of their impressive camps, their capable leaders, their large gatherings that echo across the plains during seasonal migrations. Merchants who have traded with them describe the fairness of their transactions and the calm discipline of their riders. But they also note the size of their confederation, its growing influence among the Goths, Alans, and other peoples of the northern plains. The Huns, it seems, have become one of the great powers of the region, not as city builders or conquerors, but as masters of mobility and diplomacy. Roman officials understand this. They recognize the value of maintaining strong relations with a people who command such influence across the frontier. Yet the empire's internal strains make this increasingly challenging. As financial pressures grow, some administrators argue that payments should be renegotiated. Others insist that maintaining peace is worth every coin. Still others simply hope the situation will resolve with time. These discussions reflect the gentle fluctuations of imperial policy shifts that, though subtle, are noticed by the Huns. Attila, observing these developments from across the river, remains patient. He continues to honor agreements, but he also monitors changes within the empire with quiet precision. He understands that Rome is complex, a mosaic of provinces, officials, rivalries, and obligations. And he senses that the empire's administrative strains might someday affect its ability to maintain its side of the diplomatic balance. For now, however, relations remain largely peaceful. Envoys travel back and forth. Markets on the frontier remain active. Both societies value the stability that these arrangements provide. At night, the frontier settles into a gentle calm. Roman watchtowers glow with soft torchlight. Hunnic fires flicker across the plains to the north. The river, steady and unhurried, flows between them not as a barrier, but as a quiet pathway connecting two worlds. This is a moment of equilibrium, delicate, beautiful, and temporary. For the Great Migration era is still unfolding, and soon the balance will shift again. After Attila, fragmentation and dispersal. As you move gently into the next chapter of this long, drifting history, the atmosphere of the steppe begins to shift once more. The great unity that flourished under Attila's steady guidance does not dissolve through conflict or sudden collapse. Instead, it loosens softly like a great woven cloth whose threads begin to drift apart after the hands that wove it are gone. The year is 453 CE, and the Hunnic world is entering a period of quiet transformation. Imagine the landscape in the days following Attila's passing. The wide grasslands stretch under a pale morning sky, calm and indifferent to the changes unfolding among the families who dwell upon them. Camps that once gathered around Attila's central pavilion now seem slightly unmoored, their circles still orderly, but lacking the gentle gravitational pull that kept them aligned. For the Huns' leadership has always been relational, dependent on trust, personal charisma, and the ability to mediate between clans. Attila excelled in this role. His passing leaves a silence not easily filled. The steppe itself seems to breathe more slowly as elders consider what comes next. Attila's sons, Elak Dengisic and Ernak, step naturally into positions of influence. They have grown up in the world of diplomacy, accustomed to the rhythms of seasonal gatherings, intertribal negotiations, and measured debates around evening fires. Yet leadership in the post-Attila era becomes more difficult not because of any fault of their own, but because the unity of the Confederation had always depended on the subtle balance of many voices. With Attila gone, this balance begins to shift. The first signs of fragmentation are gentle, not confrontational, but reflective, as if families are quietly evaluating their place within the larger confederation. Many allied groups, such as certain Gothic and Alan clans, had maintained close ties to the Huns out of respect for Attila's steady leadership. Without him, they begin to consider other futures. Some choose to maintain alliances, while others drift toward autonomy, guided by their own needs and traditions. This is a natural process on the steppe. Confederations form and disperse as conditions change. Nothing is fixed except the sky and the slow turning of the seasons. The Hunnic core remains intact for a time. Camps continue their seasonal migrations, herds graze peacefully, and clan leaders meet to discuss pasture routes and diplomatic relations with neighboring peoples. But the structure of the Confederation becomes lighter. Decisions that once flowed easily now take longer, shaped by differing perspectives and regional interests. Meanwhile, the world around the Huns is also shifting. The Roman Empire, though still under pressure, senses the loosening of Hunnic unity. Diplomats along the Danube observe that the once cohesive network of clans is becoming more dispersed. Communications become less centralized. Some groups request new negotiations. Others appear sporadically along the frontier seeking trade or seasonal grazing. These changes are not dramatic. They unfold gradually, like the spreading ripples on a calm lake after a single stone has touched the surface. Within the Hunnic world, each region experiences the transition differently. In the Carpathian Basin, where many Hunnic families have settled for decades, life continues with familiar routines. Camps rise along gently sloping valleys, and herds graze near quiet riverbanks. Elders here value stability. They maintain long-established connections with neighboring Gothic and Roman communities. Their days are filled with pastoral care, craftsmanship, and the steady work of nurturing kinship ties. Farther east, closer to the open steppes of the Pontic region, younger leaders feel the pull of movement. Some clans drift back toward earlier homelands in search of broader pastures or to rejoin relatives who remained farther east. These movements mirror older migration patterns, reflecting the flexible nature of steppe life rather than any crisis. To the south, certain groups look toward the Danube frontier, where trade and negotiation continue to offer opportunities. Roman markets still welcome leather goods, horses, and crafted ornaments from the steppe. Although imperial officials feel cautious after decades of Hunnic influence, diplomacy continues with quiet, businesslike consistency. Throughout these regions, the once unified Hunnic identity becomes more diverse, not lost, but reshaped, adapting to local circumstances, intermarriage, and new migrations. Archaeology offers glimpses into this period of dispersal. Burial sites from the late 5th century show a mixture of traditions. Some graves include steppe-style horse gear and distinctive Hunnic ornaments, while others incorporate local customs adopted from Gothic or Roman neighbors. These blends of material culture suggest that many Hunnic families settled into new communities, peacefully sharing skills and traditions while adopting elements of the lands they joined. Metalwork from this era remains intricate but shows greater regional variation. Designs once widely shared across the Hunnic sphere now reflect local preferences. Some ornaments retain the fluid animal motifs of the earlier steppe style. Others incorporate Roman-inspired geometric patterns. Through these artifacts, you can sense a society quietly scattering its seeds across Europe. In some regions, Hunnic influence persists through alliances and shared lifestyles. A few clans align with the Gepids, who rise in strength within the Carpathian Basin. Others join Bulgar or Alanic groups farther east. Over time, these blended communities contribute to the formation of new cultural landscapes that will shape early medieval Europe. The dispersal is not marked by destruction. It is a gentle reconfiguration, families branching outward from a once unified center and finding new places in a changing world. In the midst of this transition, Attila's youngest son, Ernak, emerges as a respected figure among the groups who remain closest to the steppe heartland. Some historical traditions suggest that he becomes a calm, steady leader for a portion of the Hunnic population, guiding them eastward into lands where older roots still linger. His leadership reflects continuity rather than ambition, offering stability to families seeking the familiar open horizons of earlier generations. Ernak's world is quieter than Attila's, but no less meaningful. He represents the enduring thread of the Hunnic story, a legacy not of conquest, but of resilience, adaptation, and deep connection to the land. As the decades pass, the great confederation once unified under Attila becomes a constellation of many smaller communities. Some settle permanently among their neighbors, others continue their pastoral migrations. A few retain distinct Hunnic identities well into later centuries, while others blend so thoroughly into surrounding cultures that their origins become a soft memory carried only in objects, stories, and subtle traditions. And yet, in this gentle dispersal, nothing is lost. The knowledge of the steppe persists. The techniques of horsemanship, the artistry of metalwork, the mobility that once spanned continents, all continue through the peoples who inherited these traditions. As night falls over the wide plains, you can almost picture the small clusters of Hunnic tents glowing faintly under starlight in many different regions. Not as one united camp, but as many peaceful hearths scattered across the horizon, each one carrying a fragment of the great story forward. Echoes on the steppe successor, peoples and cultural memory. As the great Hunnic confederation softens into many smaller clusters of families, the wide steppe settles once more into its long, gentle breathing. Seasons continue their slow cycle. Rivers freeze and thaw. Grass rises and bends beneath the wind. And across this landscape, the memory of the Huns does not vanish. It simply changes shape, echoing quietly through the peoples who inherit their traditions, their skills, and their quiet way of reading the land. To follow these echoes, imagine yourself drifting eastward across the plains in the late 5th and early 6th centuries. The horizon stretches in a calm, unbroken line. Tents stand in small groups near rivers and sheltered valleys. Children lead horses to pasture. Metal workers hammer softly near low fires. Life feels familiar, though its social patterns have shifted since the days of Attila. The first echoes appear among the Gepids and Goths settled in and around the Carpathian Basin. Here, some Hunnic families choose to remain their lives, blending naturally with the rhythms of their neighbors. Archaeological evidence shows mixed burial customs, steppe-style horse equipment, paired with Gothic brooches carved bone ornaments resting beside Roman glassware. These quiet combinations reveal families who live comfortably between worlds, adopting local customs while preserving the memory of their steppe origins. Over time, their descendants become part of emerging early medieval societies. They speak new languages, follow new leaders, but continue to pass down stories of ancestors who once rode across the plains with herds and tents. These memories are never lost entirely. They become part of regional heritage, gentle whispers that remain in place, names, artistic motifs, and the quiet pride of families who remember that their forebears were skilled riders and makers of finely worked metal. Farther east, beyond the Carpathian forests, the echoes take on a different shape. Here, the Alans, longtime neighbors of the Huns, continue their seasonal migrations, guiding herds across familiar landscapes. Some Alan groups incorporate Hunnic families into their communities, sharing techniques of horsemanship and archery that were once central to Hunnic life. Over time, these blended groups move southward into the Caucasus region, where they maintain their pastoral traditions for centuries. They become known to later historians as the Alans of the Caucasus, ancestors of the Ossetian peoples who still inhabit those mountain valleys today. In their burial traditions, you still see traces of steppe heritage horse gear placed beside the deceased metal ornaments with curving animal motifs and tools shaped from bone and iron in familiar patterns. These artifacts, small and unassuming, are the gentle echoes of a world that once stretched from Mongolia to the Danube. To the north of the Black Sea, other steppe groups rise in the wake of the Huns. Among them are the Bulgars, a confederation of Turkic-speaking pastoralists who adopt and adapt many Hunnic traditions. They move in wide arcs across the plains, following routes that earlier Hunnic and Alan families traveled. Their leaders maintain the steppe's emphasis on negotiation, gift-giving, and mobility. Their daily life, shaped by tense horses and careful reading of the land, resembles the world the Huns once knew. By the late 7th century, some Bulgar groups migrate westward into the Balkans, where they establish new political centers alongside Slavic-speaking peoples. In archaeological sites associated with early Bulgar communities, you find once again the echoes of older steppe cultures, composite bows, steppe-style belt sets, and burial rites that honor horses as loyal companions in life and death. These objects speak softly of a memory carried forward generation after generation. Through them, a part of the Hunnic tradition survives. Still farther west, in the heart of the Carpathian Basin, another group emerges whose history is deeply intertwined with steppe heritage, the early Magyars. Although they arise centuries after Attila, their lifestyle resembles the world the Huns once inhabited. They drive herds across the same plains, build felt tents in the same valleys, and ride small, sturdy horses whose ancestry stretches back into the deep past of Central Asia. When the Magyars arrive in the Carpathian Basin in the 9th century, medieval chroniclers note the familiarity of their customs, their archery, their mobility, their pastoral economy. These chroniclers, looking back through centuries of memory and myth, sometimes describe the Magyars as heirs to the Huns, not because they are direct descendants in a biological sense, but because they carry forward the cultural rhythms of the steppe. Modern archaeology supports this idea softly, without exaggeration. It shows that many threads of steppe tradition, patterns of dress metallurgy, horse gear, and camp organization persist across the centuries, woven through the lives of multiple peoples. The Magyars are one of these inheritors, preserving parts of the mobile way of life that the Huns once represented. Even as new societies form, the memory of the Huns continues to echo in stories. In Gothic oral traditions, the Huns sometimes appear as distant figures who once traveled across the plains and shaped the destinies of many tribes. Roman writers, even centuries later, refer to the Huns when describing steppe peoples whose features or customs resemble those recorded in earlier histories. Medieval chroniclers in Eastern Europe sometimes fold Hunnic elements into broader legends about wandering peoples, kings of the plains, and alliances forged under the open sky. These stories are not exact histories. They drift, soften, and transform over time, yet they preserve the general outline of a truth. The Huns were part of a long continuum of steppe life, one that did not end with their dispersal, but flowed onward through many successor peoples. Material culture carries this memory just as gently. Small artifacts found across Europe reflect steppe patterns, long after the Huns themselves have faded from written sources. Metal belt sets with curving animal designs, buckles with geometric patterns reminiscent of earlier steppe motifs, bits and stirrups shaped for horses bred for endurance and agility. These objects appear not as isolated finds, but as part of a broad archaeological horizon that stretches across centuries. They remind you that culture is rarely lost. It changes shape, moves quietly through families and regions, and adapts to new circumstances. The Hunnic Confederation may have dissolved as a political entity, but its spirit, the mobility, the craftsmanship, the way of reading the land through the eyes of horse and wind, survives in many different forms. As the sun sinks low over the steppe, you see once more the wide horizon stretching outward, calm and open. Across this landscape, successor peoples travel their chosen paths. Some settle, some wander, all shaped by the deep heritage of the plains. You feel that the Hunnic story is not ending. It is evolving, softening, and becoming part of the wider human story of movement, adaptation, and quiet resilience. A legacy across continents, how the Huns shaped Europe. As you arrive at the final chapter of this long and gentle journey, the wide expanse of the Eurasian steppe opens before you one last time. The winds whisper across the grasslands, carrying memories of countless migrations, alliances, stories, and seasons. The Huns who once moved across this great landscape in a rhythm shaped by horses and sky are no longer a unified confederation. Yet their influence continues to drift through the centuries, soft and steady like dust carried on a quiet breeze. Their legacy does not take the form of empires carved in stone. It lives instead in movements, cultural echoes, and the quiet reshaping of entire regions. To understand this legacy, you must look backward with the same unhurried attention that has guided the entire journey. Begin with the simplest truth. Before the Huns appeared along the Roman frontier, the peoples of Eastern Europe and the Western steppe lived in relative isolation from the deep interior of Asia. Contacts existed, traders passing along the Silk Road, wanderers carrying goods or stories from afar, but these links were intermittent and faint. The Hunnic migrations changed this balance. By moving westward, the Huns served as a bridge between distant worlds. Their journey connected Central Asia, the Pontic steppe, and the Danube basin in ways that encouraged new interactions between peoples who had never encountered one another so directly. These connections did not always take the form of conflict. More often they took shape through patterns of accommodation, alliance, and cultural blending. The Great Migration era, which historians identify as one of the major turning points of late antiquity, was not caused by the Huns alone, but the Huns played a significant role in its quiet beginnings. Their presence encouraged Goths, Alans, and many other groups to reevaluate their positions within the changing landscape. Some moved southward toward the Roman Empire, others shifted east or west in search of new alliances, still others integrated with the Huns themselves. This gentle ripple of movement would eventually reshape the political map of Europe. Another element of the Hunnic legacy flows through the transformation of borderlands. Before the Huns arrived, the Roman frontier was a line defined by forts, watchtowers, treaties, and organized patterns of exchange. After decades of interaction with the Huns, this frontier became more dynamic. Diplomacy grew more complex, requiring the Romans to engage with steppe leaders as equals, negotiating terms that reflected mutual interests rather than unilateral decisions. These negotiations taught Roman diplomats to appreciate the nuances of nomadic politics. They learned that steppe confederations were not disorganized hordes, as earlier writers had sometimes imagined, but sophisticated networks of families, alliances, and settled agreements. This understanding reshaped imperial policy for generations. In this way, the Huns helped broaden Rome's diplomatic outlook, pushing it to refine its approaches to mobile societies, a lesson that later Eastern Roman Byzantine administrators would apply in their dealings with Avars, Bulgars, and early Magyars. Technology and craftsmanship also reflect the Hunnic legacy. This is clearest in metalwork traditions. The flowing, curving animal motifs of steppe artisans inherited from far older artistic lineages became woven into the decorative vocabulary of early medieval Europe. Belt buckles, harness fittings, jewelry, and ceremonial ornaments show traces of Hunnic influence well into the 6th and 7th centuries. These objects blend local styles with steppe designs, creating a new artistic language that flows smoothly across borders. Horsemanship, too, sees subtle transformation. Although the Huns did not introduce horseback riding to Europe, their mastery of mounted mobility offered a model that later peoples would emulate. Techniques in riding, horse breeding, and saddle design continued to evolve under steppe influence. These developments contributed centuries later to the distinctive cavalry cultures of medieval Europe, the armored riders of the Carpathian Basin, the swift-mounted units of the Byzantine frontier, and the light horsemen of early Hungarian and Bulgar armies. These threads trace a lineage of movement and adaptation that can be followed from Attila's time deep into the medieval period. Beyond technology, one of the most lasting aspects of the Hunnic legacy lies in their contribution to the cultural mosaic of early Europe. As the Huns dispersed and integrated into neighboring societies, they brought with them traditions shaped by centuries on the steppe traditions of mobility, diplomacy, shared pasture rights, and communal leadership. In the Carpathian Basin, where many Hunnic families settled after the disintegration of the Confederation, these traditions influenced emerging groups in subtle but enduring ways. The early Avars who arrived in the 6th century inherited parts of the steppe organizational model preserved among post-Hunnic communities. The Bulgars, as described in the previous chapter, developed political structures that mirrored earlier Hunnic and Xiongnu patterns. The Magyars, though arriving centuries later, carried forward a pastoral lifestyle deeply reminiscent of the Huns' way of life, one shaped by herds, horses, and seasonal migrations across the same plains. In this sense, the Huns helped seed the cultural landscape of early medieval Europe, shaping the traditions of multiple successor peoples. Even the Roman Empire, often seen as the opposite pole to the nomadic world, absorbed aspects of the Hunnic legacy. The challenges posed by Hunnic diplomacy forced Roman administrators to rethink the organization of frontier defenses, concentrating more authority in regional military commanders and creating new categories of federati allied groups who lived within the empire and provided military assistance. This system, born partly from the necessity of managing relations with powerful mobile peoples, became a cornerstone of early medieval political structures. It influenced the way European societies later integrated migrating groups into established polities, blending local populations with newcomers through negotiated settlement and mutual obligation. Beyond the political and cultural legacy, there remains a softer, more human dimension, the quiet memory preserved across family stories and oral traditions. In parts of Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Caucasus tale of ancient riders on the steppe continue to circulate centuries after the Huns dispersed. These stories often blend myth and memory, portraying the Huns not as conquerors, but as travelers, herders, and leaders who lived close to the land. Over time, the exact details blur, but the essence remains a remembrance of people who valued mobility, family ties, and the wisdom of the natural world. These memories endure in simple customs, the way horses are adorned for festivals, the design of certain metal ornaments, the rhythms of songs sung under the open sky. Such details, though easy to overlook, reflect an inheritance carried through generations. As you take a final look across the vast landscape shaped by Hunnic history, you see not a vanished empire, but a long chain of influences spreading quietly across continents. The Huns did not leave behind towering ruins or written chronicles. Their legacy lives instead in the movement of peoples, the blending of cultures, and the subtle imprints they left on the societies that followed. Their story is a story of mobility adaptation and deep connection to the natural world. It is a reminder that history is not only written in stone, sometimes it is carried in memory, passed down through gestures, tools, and a gentle flow of everyday life. The winds of the steppe continue to whisper these memories, carrying them across the plains, just as they once carried the riders who shaped the course of European history.